number 11, and I want to speak today about a half Kaddish that caused a world war. Yom Kippur Mincha and the Shachris of Tisha Bav have one thing in common, and that is that there's three aliyahs, there is a HAFTORAH, and the guy who gets the third aliyah gets the HAFTORAH. The Mordechai Paskins, Hashlishi Maftir B'chol HaTaniyot, indeed the third aliyah is the one that reads the HAFTORAH on all the fast days, including Yom Kippur. So he gets an aliyah, Hag Baglila, and immediately we read Maftir Yonah. That's what the Darkei Moshe, or the Ramah Paskins in his name. That's what the Mishnah Berurah Paskins in the name of the Darkei Moshe. There's no Kaddish at Mincha of Yom Kippur between the Torah reading and the HAFTORAH, and ultimately that's what we do on every fast day at Mincha. Well, what do we do at Shachris of Tisha Bav? At Shachris of Tisha Bav, as everybody knows, as the Piskei Tshuva says, Maftir. Indeed, the same situation. The third aliyah is the guy who gets the Maftir. Well, in order to answer this question, do you say Kaddish or not, like we usually do in the morning of any Shachris after we read the Torah, the question is going to be, why does the guy even get an aliyah? The Gemara in Megillah, Daf Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph, and says, Bipnei Kvod HaTorah, explains Rashi, Shelo yeh Kvod HaTorah u'Kvod HaNavi shaveh. What does that mean? That basically means that we want that there shouldn't be a situation where two people got an aliyah from the Torah, and the third person only read the HAFTORAH. We have to make clear that the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim are important, but not on the same level of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah from Bereshit through Devarim, simply because those were dictated word for word, letter to God, and Moshe wrote them down. And the rest were written by the Nevi'im based on what they understood, based on their own language. So because they're on a lower level, we don't want people to think that the Torah, the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the Sefer Torah, is at the same level as the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim, and therefore he gets an aliyah. Well, as everybody knows, on a regular Shabbos, there's 7 aliyahs, there's a Kaddish, and then there's Maftir, an 8th aliyah, an extra aliyah, and then he reads from the HAFTORAH. And indeed, we fulfill this enactment by not putting any divisions between the aliyah and the HAFTORAH. Namely, he finishes his aliyah, Hag Baglila, boom, right into the HAFTORAH. Therefore, at that point, we do not say Kaddish. We say Kaddish prior. But if you only have 7 aliyahs, the Ramah Paskins clearly that if the 7th aliyah person is the guy who's going to read Maftir, there will not be an 8th aliyah. Lo Amar Kaddish, if you didn't say Kaddish yet, Yaftir Misha Ala L'Shvi'i, the guy who got the last aliyah, the 7th on Shabbos, the 6th on Yom Kippur, the 5th on Yom Tov, he should read the HAFTORAH. And indeed, comes along the Magen Avraham and says clearly that in such a situation, Al Yomar Kaddish Acharav, don't say Kaddish yet, but rather Yomar Kaddish Achara HAFTORAH. Why can't you say Kaddish after the Torah reading like we usually do? The answer is spelled out to us by the Rimi Gashter. אינו מפסיק ביניהם בקדיש, אם הפסיק ביניהם בקדיש, אז הייתה קריאתו הראשונה כבר נגמרה ושב להיות כשרם. ולסיבה זאת תקנו שלא לומר קדיש במנחה ביום הכיפורים ובתשעה באב בין התורה והנביא. Basically he says that in order to fulfill this enactment of the sages, that you have to read the Torah before you get the HAFTORAH, you must, I repeat, you must do it in a way that they are connected. If there's anything that differentiates between them, you didn't fulfill the enactment. From this perspective, as we get to Tisha B'Av morning, we should do like we do in the afternoon. 3rd aliyah, Hag Baglila, HAFTORAH of Tisha B'Av morning, and then the half Kaddish. Rabbi Akiva Yiger in his Perush to the Shulchan Aruch indeed said, I don't understand why they say Kaddish after the Torah reading, between the Torah reading and the HAFTORAH, on Tisha B'Av morning. We don't do it at Mincha of Yom Kippur. We don't do it on Mincha of fast day, so why should Tisha B'Av morning be any different? Tamati Shariti Anahuk Shomim Kaddish Achar Shekarash Shiva Torah Kodem Shomrim HaHaftorah. And he ultimately says, She'im Mafsikim B'Kaddish, if you say Kaddish, then Havikil HaFtorah Lechut. You're basically making clear, hey, Aliyah is finished, Kaddish was said, and now he's only getting the HAFTORAH. In order to fulfill the enactment of the sages that you got an aliyah first, there can't be a division between them, and therefore Rabbi Akiva Yiger says the proper thing is to say the Kaddish after the HAFTORAH and not before. But having said that, that's exactly what most people do. And this comes in 2 different perspectives. Perspective number 1 is the Levush. He comes and says that usually you say Kaddish before you bring up and call up the Maftir aliyah, but in this case, this is not the case. The Bishara Kadishim omrim oto kodem shekoy maftir, v'kan omrim oto achar shekaru ashlishi shu maftir. And he explains why. Mishum debishar yamot hashana maftiru yeter al haminyan shetzarich likot v'kana maftiru min haminyan hanikreim lifkikach en mafsiki benehem bekadish harei adayin lo karu kol chovat hayom. In a word, according to the Levush, you always say Kaddish, the half Kaddish, when you finish the requisite aliyahs you're supposed to read that day. So the extra aliyah on Shabbos is said after the Kaddish. But since we don't have extra aliyahs on Tisha B'Av, there's only 3, therefore you say it after the 3rd aliyah. The Magen Avraham concurs that, indeed, when there is a HAFTORAH on a weekday, so, first and foremost, it seems like there's a bunch of poskim that say you say the half Kaddish when you finish the requisite aliyahs of that day. 3 on a weekday. At the same time, there was endless sources that said that on Tisha B'Av, they said the half Kaddish after the 3rd aliyah. And let's start all the way back from Rashi. There's a Sefer HaPardes, which seems to be at least attributed to the responsum of Rashi. It says, "B'magensa Kaddish b'Tisha B'Av lachar shekaru shlishi hamaftir b'Torah." The Abu Draham, going to the Sephardic world from Rashi's world, v'korin Kohen v'Levi v'maftir b'Parshat V'etchanan, ve'omer Kaddish, and then you say the maftir. In addition, the Kobo says, v'korin Gimel b'Parshat Kito Lidbanim v'omrim Kaddish Zuta, v'hagimel maftir b'Yirmiyah, and the Shibbolei Haleket, he quotes his uncle Rav Binyamin that explains that ultimately Mincha Yom HaKippurim v'Tisha B'Av sheyesh bahem kriyat HAFTORAH hamafseket ben HaKaddish shela'achar kriyat HaTorah leKaddish shelifnei HaTfilah b'Mincha makdishin la'achar kriyat HaTorah. You say Kaddish after the kriyat HaTorah before the HAFTORAH. And finally, the Avin HaOzer disagrees with Rabbi Akiva Eger on the page of the Shulchan Aruch, and ultimately says that the Kaddish is not a hefsek, and you could say it. So, even though Rabbi Akiva Eger makes sense, you shouldn't have a hefsek between the aliyah and the maftir. Why is it that we do say Kaddish? That seems to be the general minhag. There is a beautiful book written by my esteemed colleague Rav Nahi Helfgott, written in memory of his father, in which he talks about this issue. And he comes to the conclusion that there is a difference between the Kriyas HaTorah and the HAFTORAH, and this is the difference. The Kriyas HaTorah happens to be a very optimistic one. Namely, we can seek out God, we can do tshuva, and we can ultimately rectify this Tisha B'Av day into a better day. In his words, Kriyat HaTorah b'Tisha B'Av v'Yesodha Kiyum B'Ilchutanit, the Tisha B'Av morning reading happens to be a fast day reading. He takes that position of the 2 positions we said yesterday. And therefore, because it's a fast day oriented Torah reading, you can indeed seek out God, and this day will change into a wonderful day. On the other hand, the Kriyas HaHaftorah b'Yom Tisha B'Av, indeed, the Haftorah, Asof HaSifem, is morning from beginning to end. The Magen Avraham says that you read it benigun eicha, and the Maharil comes along and says that you say Asof HaSifem benigun hamikra v'lo benigun achar haftorot. You have to change the tune. It is absolutely in the category of morning. So since Kriyas HaTorah is fast-oriented, which means we can do tshuva and rectify, versus the Haftorah, which deals with mourning and everything terrible that happened, the Kaddish is very much in place because you have to make a division between the optimism of the future to the mourning of the past. So indeed, Minhag Yisrael is to say that Kaddish despite the objection of Rabbi Akiva Eger. And indeed, if he's right, we can understand why these are the flimsy 3 weeks. That Torah reading tells us we can change things. Indeed, for the future, this will not be a day in which we will sit on the floor. We will sit on chairs. It will not be a day in which we will allow to use our car. It will be a yontif. The future, based on this Torah reading, looks very glamorous, but it's up to us.